What if growing up without smartphones, internet, or helicopter parents didn't hold you back, but actually shaped your brain in ways that make you uniquely resilient today? People who spent their childhood in the 1970s developed psychological patterns that researchers are only now beginning to understand. In a world obsessed with constant connectivity and structure, their formative years created something remarkably different. Psychology and developmental neuroscience reveal that the decade you grow up in doesn't just influence your music taste or fashion choices. It fundamentally shapes how your brain processes information, handles stress, and forms relationships. In this video, you'll discover 7 psychological traits common among those who grew up in the 1970s, and why these characteristics are more relevant than ever. Stay till the end. The last trait reveals why 1970s kids are often more adaptable than any other generation. Unstructured play created superior problem-solving skills. Children of the 1970s spent hours outside with minimal adult supervision, creating their own games and solving their own conflicts. Psychology reveals this wasn't neglect, it was an accidental training ground for executive function. Without constant adult intervention, these children's brains develop stronger neural pathways for independent problem-solving and creative thinking. Neuroscience shows that unstructured play activates the prefrontal cortex differently than guided activities, building resilience and adaptability. If you grew up making your own fun without instructions or apps, your brain literally wired itself for autonomous thinking. Research indicates that children with more unstructured playtime develop stronger conflict resolution skills and emotional regulation as adults. Delayed gratification became second nature. Growing up in the 1970s meant waiting for everything. Waiting for your favorite TV show once a week. Waiting for photos to be developed. Waiting for information from encyclopedias or libraries. Behavioral psychology shows this constant practice of delayed gratification strengthened impulse control in ways that shaped lifelong patterns. The famous Stanford marshmallow experiment was actually conducted in the early 1970s, and children from that era had natural training in waiting that modern children rarely experience. If you remember anticipating something for days or weeks, your brain develops stronger dopamine regulation systems. Studies suggest this makes 1970s children better at long-term planning and less susceptible to instant gratification traps as adults. Analog communication built deeper empathy networks. Without text messages or social media, 1970s kids learned to read body language, vocal tone, and facial expressions as their primary communication tools. Cognitive neuroscience reveals that face-to-face interaction during critical developmental years creates more robust mirror neuron systems, the brain networks responsible for empathy and emotional intelligence. Phone calls required active listening without visual cues, sharpening auditory processing for emotional content. Writing letters demanded thoughtful expression and patience. If you grew up without digital shortcuts for communication, research shows you likely developed superior emotional intelligence and interpersonal sensitivity. These neural patterns, formed before age 12, create lasting advantages in reading social situations and building authentic connections. Limited information access created resourceful thinkers. In the 1970s, finding information required effort. Visiting libraries, asking knowledgeable people, experimenting and learning from mistakes. Psychology reveals this constraint paradoxically expanded cognitive flexibility. Without instant answers, children's brains develop stronger hypothesis-testing abilities and creative problem-solving strategies. The struggle itself became valuable cognitive training. Behavioral studies show that when answers come easily, critical thinking muscles atrophy. If you remember having to figure things out through trial and error, your brain built resilience to ambiguity and uncertainty. This creates adults who are less anxious about not knowing and more confident in their ability to learn, traits increasingly valuable in our rapidly changing world. Physical risk-taking developed calculated courage. Climbing trees, riding bikes without helmets, building questionable forts, 1970s childhoods included physical risks that would horrify modern parents. Developmental psychology shows that appropriate risk-taking during childhood is essential for building courage and realistic risk assessment. When children navigate physical challenges independently, their amygdala, the brain's fear center, learns to distinguish real danger from manageable risk. If you grew up with skinned knees and minor injuries from adventurous play, research indicates you developed better risk calibration than those raised in highly protected environments. This translates to adults who can take calculated professional and personal risks without paralyzing anxiety. The body keeps score, and those early experiences taught your nervous system that recovery from setbacks is possible. Boredom sparked creativity and self-reliance. Perhaps the most striking difference, 1970s kids experienced regular, sustained boredom with no screens to fill the void. Neuroscience research reveals that boredom is actually a critical state for creativity and self-discovery. When the brain isn't constantly stimulated, it activates the default mode network, the neural system responsible for imagination, self-reflection, and innovative thinking. If you remember staring at the ceiling or wandering aimlessly until you invented something to do, your brain was actually developing crucial self-entertainment skills and creative capacity. Studies show that adults who experience childhood boredom demonstrate greater intrinsic motivation and lower dependence on external stimulation. This creates people who are comfortable with themselves and less vulnerable to the anxiety of being alone with their thoughts. Collective media experiences built shared cultural language. With only 3 TV channels and radio stations everyone listened to, 1970s kids developed a remarkably unified cultural reference system. Social psychology reveals this created stronger collective identity and communication efficiency within their generation. When everyone watched the same shows at the same time, it created shared experiences that built social cohesion and common ground for connection. If you can reference a TV show or song and instantly connect with someone your age, this shared cultural vocabulary actually reduces social anxiety and speeds relationship formation. Research indicates that fragmented media landscapes, while offering more choice, create less common ground between people. The 1970s generation possesses a cultural fluency that makes them particularly skilled at building bridges across diverse groups. Growing up in the 1970s wasn't about what children had, it was about what they developed in the space where technology hadn't yet filled every gap. Unstructured time, delayed gratification, face-to-face connection, information scarcity, physical risk, boredom, and shared culture, these aren't disadvantages. Psychology reveals they're the building blocks of resilience, creativity, empathy, and adaptability. If you recognize these traits in yourself or someone you know, understand that they represent genuine psychological strengths forged in a unique moment in human development. These patterns make 1970s kids particularly well-equipped to navigate complexity, uncertainty, and rapid change. If you found these insights valuable, subscribe for weekly psychology content that helps you understand the invisible forces that shaped who you are. The decade you grew up in left fingerprints on your brain, and understanding them is the first step to leveraging your unique strengths.